So welcome everyone to this CEFTUS talk, online talk on Turkey-West relation, the politics of intra-alliance opposition, which is really a presentation of the book by Dr. Oya Dursun-Özkanca, who you see in one of the screens here. My name is Juliette Tolay. I am Associate Professor of Political Science at Penn State in Harrisburg in the US. I do most of my research on Turkey, foreign policy, migration, and things of the like. And I am delighted to be here as the kind of moderator for this session. So this is for those of you who might not be familiar, this is a talk hosted by CEFTUS, which is an independent and non-partisan organization based in London, whose mission is to build bridges between the US and Turkey and the region. It stands for Center for Turkey Studies, building bridges between Turkey and the UK. And so the way we're going to proceed, we have about an hour, and roughly we'll have the first half hour of presentation by Dr. Dursun-Özkanca, and then we'll have another half hour for going back and forth with questions and answers, so that should leave us enough time for a good discussion. So let me introduce our main speaker here. So Dr. Oya Dursun-Özkanca is the endowed chair of international studies and professor of political science at Elizabethtown College in the US. Her research interests include Turkish foreign policy, transatlantic security, the EU, Southeast Europe, and peace operations. She is the editor of two books, one on the EU as an actor in security sector reform, and another one on external interventions in civil wars. She also has numerous scholarly articles published in different places and has received, she's been a visiting fellow at LSE, received grants from a number of prestigious places and awards. But of most importance for us here today, she has recently authored this book called Turkey-West Relations, the Politics of Intra-alliance Opposition, which would be the main topic of our meeting today. So without further ado, Oya, I'm going to give you the floor, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Dr. Tolay, for this beautiful introduction and agreeing to moderate today's discussion and the book talk. So let me share my screen. I have a PowerPoint prepared for this occasion. So can everybody see my screen? Yes, okay, thank you so much. So very nice to be in front of this distinguished audience. In fact, it is such a pleasure to be in this particular talk, because the idea of the book, Turkey-West Relations, has really emerged when I was a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. And in fact, the book itself started as a very different project than how it ended up in front of you tonight, according to the UK time, and this afternoon, according to Standard Eastern Time. It was supposed to be a book on Turkish foreign policy in the Western Balkans. And then I was talking to some editors in the various different political science conferences, and I was advised to broaden the scope of it. So full disclosure, this is how I ended up writing this book, which took me about 7 years to complete as a project. So I remember entering the LSE building with a stroller with my 2.5-month-old son, who is now 8.5 years old. So 2.5-month-old son. So yes, it adds up. And I received a lot of support from my colleagues, for which I am so grateful. But without further ado, let me take you to the topic of today's talk. So the puzzle that I sought to address in the book was Turkey has always been deeply rooted in its relations with the Western front. The West meaning here the European Union, NATO, and the United States specifically. And Turkey has been really deeply rooted in this transatlantic alliance ever since 1952, for instance, when Turkey and Greece were admitted into the NATO alliance. And Turkey sacrificed so much for earning this invitation to join the NATO alliance. And Turkey has been a member of OSCE, has been a candidate country of the European Union since 1999, but we all know that the journey started back in 1959. So it has been a very long journey. Turkey finally opened up the accession negotiations process with the European Union in 2005. However, so far, as we all know, I think this audience is quite an informed audience about Turkey's relations with the EU. As we all know, so far only one chapter has been provisionally closed, and provisionally because of the technical issues remaining and political issues remaining, especially with regards to Turkey's non-implementation of the additional protocol to extend the customs union to all countries of the European Union, including the Republic of Cyprus, which Turkey does not diplomatically recognize. So scarcely a day passes without a report or a headline that suggests that Turkey is no longer a part of the Western alliance, questioning the reliability of Turkey as a Western ally. Are they really an ally? Are they not? There are certainly tense relations with the United States, and here we are about a few days after President Biden has officially recognized the atrocities that took place back in 1915 as a genocide. So we are seeing the bilateral relations in terms of Turkey's relations with the United States really strained at this particular point in time. And here also we see a Turkey that is engaging in a rapprochement with Russia in terms of deepening its security and defense relations with that particular country. And we, as I mentioned, we have particularly frozen relations between Turkey and the European Union, very problematic relations that, that are due to a variety of different issues, from technical issues, like I mentioned, to political issues. So the puzzle that I sought to address in this book is Turkey's strategic estrangement from the West. So how and why do we see a Turkey that is increasingly moving away from its commitments within the Western alliance? How and why did we get here to the status of a strategic estrangement? So what are the motivations, foreign policy motivations of Turkey vis-a-vis the United States, European Union, and NATO are some of the questions that I addressed in the book. And just very briefly, if I were to walk you through my research process, I have been conducting research about Turkish foreign policy for a very long time, and the time frame of this study goes back to 2011, and it stops in 2017 for the interviews that I have conducted with elites, with policy elites from about 7 countries that are listed here on the screen. So I engaged in semi-structured elite interviews with over 200 elites, ranging from journalists to human rights activists to members of the parliament to foreign policy core, diplomats, from party officials to academics, as well as non-governmental organization representatives such as the European Union and NATO. what I have designated as a gap in the book is that the book uses soft balancing literature as a springboard. Soft balancing is basically whenever friends engage in balancing type of behavior to try to counterbalance their counterpart allies, this we call soft balancing. And soft balancing normally utilizes diplomacy, economic statecraft, as well as interinstitutional balancing, which makes it very different from hard balancing, because hard balancing basically incorporates a lot of really harsh measures, hard power-related measures, such as the use of force or the threat to use force. So certainly it doesn't really belong to the realm of balancing between friends. So what I did, however, was that in the literature review part of the book, I noticed that, and I attracted attention of the audience and the readers, that the soft balancing literature does not necessarily talk about or distinguish between the different tools of statecraft that are available to the states when they are dealing with their counterparts that are in an alliance, in terms of the intensity of these tools of statecraft. So the novelty behind this book, the theoretical novelty behind this book, is that it comes up with three broad categories of intra-alliance opposition behavior: boundary testing, boundary challenging, and boundary breaking. And these three categories are helpful for us to understand the different levels of intensity of the tools of statecraft that are used by states when dealing with their allies, and also to distinguish between the motivations behind the use of each tool. Here, I really like this figure because it really succinctly summarizes the theoretical background, the framework that is offered by the book. These are three different processes, as you can see in figure number 1, and they are not mutually exclusive, as you can see. There are a number of convergence points between these three different processes of intra-alliance opposition. And they range from active diplomacy to interinstitutional balancing to territorial or asset denial alternative alliances. So you see varying levels of intensity there. And another thing that is important for us to understand is that these are not steps, these are simply processes. So step 1, so process 1 actually does not lead to process 2, as we would anticipate in a step 1, step 2, step 3 type of an order. So these are processes, and at any point in time, allies can revert back to a lower intensity tools of statecraft in order to mend their ties with their counterparts within the alliance. So that is an important thing for us to understand. So these processes do not automatically lead to other ones, and at any time parties may revert back to lower intensity intra-alliance behavior, as long as there is no irreparable damage to the intra-alliance dynamics. So alliances are very sensitive entities. Yes, they are certainly governed and organized based on certain different institutions, very important rules, and so on and so forth, but they can be also very tricky. So any type of disagreements that are played out in the open in front of a public audience may really exert such damage to the alliance's dynamics. So that is something that we should be always very mindful of. So In the book, I have a number of different case studies, ranging from my original topic, that is Turkish foreign policy in the Western Balkans, to Turkish double veto over Turkish and Cypriot double veto over the NATO-EU security exchange information, which is still to this day causing some headache for coordinating the relationship between NATO and the European Union, two organizations that often operate in the same field, actually. So because of the double vetoes used by Turkey and the Republic of Cyprus, these two organizations cannot engage in official security exchange, security information exchange that would facilitate their coordination in the field. Yes, they have devised some very creative measures, such as informal meeting groups that contain the representatives of both sides to engage in some day-to-day coordination of behavior, but at the official level, that is missing because of these double vetoes. So that's another case study that I cover in the book. EU-Turkey refugees deal is another chapter in the book. Another one is energy security issues, and another one is Turkey's rapprochement with Russia on security and defense affairs. And final chapter is Turkish foreign policy in Iraq and Syria. So the way I chose these different case studies was based on chronological order of the evolution of the Turkey's relations with the West, and to see how over time we have seen the dynamic of the relationship change. So we are seeing in the conclusion part of the book, I conclude that we are increasingly observing a Turkey that is increasingly engaging in boundary breaking behavior. So that is increasingly utilizing costly signaling, territorial denial, asset denial, compelling threats, and cooperative balancing with Russia and others to redefine its relations in a way with the United States, European Union, and NATO allies. So over time, the intensity of statecraft tools utilized by Turkey has increased as displayed in the case studies in various different chapters. And I conclude the book by noting that there is a continued resentment on the part of the Turkish authorities that the West is not interested in listening to our concerns. The West is not interested in listening to our legitimate national security-related interests. And the West is not interested in sharing a seat with Turkey around the table, giving Turkey an equal say on the issues that are concerning all of the allies. So we see that on the part of the Turkish authorities. And I also mention about the lack of trust, which is really a significant issue in my analysis. As we have seen throughout the book, there is this overwhelming amount of mistrust that is not only true for the Turkish perspective vis-a-vis the West, but also true for the Western perspectives vis-a-vis Turkey. So we are seeing this really adversely affecting the dynamics of the relationship between Turkey and its Western allies. And another thing that I also attract attention to in the book is the adverse domestic climate within Turkey. We see throughout different public opinion polls that are conducted, we see an overwhelming feeling of anti-Americanism, anti-EU sentiments, although they are relatively lower when compared to anti-Americanist sentiments in the Turkish public opinion. They are certainly adversely affecting the relationship as well, especially in the post-2016 political context in Turkey, where we have seen these types of rhetorics incorporated into the official declarations by Turkish state authorities. So we are seeing these types of developments within the Turkish domestic political context. Before I move on with the post-2019 developments, I would like to take us to these three criteria that I identified in the book, in the concluding chapter. So what are the factors behind the changing relations between Turkey and the West? So what causes these? And there are three really main factors that are influential here that really complement each other, that need to be taken into consideration in connection with each other. So the first one is changing international system. Here we are seeing the world is observing that the United States is no longer the sole hegemon of the international order, international system. So there are multiple challenging countries that are ascending in power, and Turkey looks around and sees a changing region as well. So Turkish authorities, I make the argument, that want to adjust themselves in a way to posit Turkey in a way that would be regarded as a regional power, if not a global power. Because in the book, I also refer to a few declarations made by President Erdogan about him wanting to see Turkey as a world power, and saying that if you want to be a world power, you have to maintain a strong military presence, and you have to do so, and you have to engage in the rest of the world in a more active manner. So you see these regional factors, Turkey looking around and seeing a completely different region than what it saw previously to 2010. And we are seeing increasingly present Russia in these regional affairs. We are seeing a retraction on the part of the European Union when it comes to its willingness to engage with the rest of the world, because the European Union itself had to deal with its own particular problems, ranging from enlargement fatigue to Brexit, which is dear to this organization and most of the audience's hearts. And at the same time, dealing with the Eurozone crisis and multiple different issues, such as COVID in the last couple of months. Over the past year or so. Another important factor here is the irreconcilable interests. Sorry, I saw something in the, sure, I will speak a bit louder, sorry. So let me try to, okay. Can everybody hear me well? Yes? All right. So basically irreconcilable interests on the parts of the allies when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to, for instance, the removal of Assad from power in Syria, when it comes to the fight against Thank you. Fight against the Islamic State. Turkey did not really see eye to eye with the Western allies on that particular issue. For instance, I am going to go back to that. We are going to talk about this in the post-2019 developments, because I want to show you in the book, so we talked about the systemic and regional causes of this particular, problematic relations between Turkey and the West. We talked about irreconcilable differences, irreconcilable interests when it comes to the resolution of Cyprus problem, when it comes to the response to Syrian developments, and so on and so forth. And also, like I alluded in my previous remarks, some domestic factors that are also factored in to this, problematic relationship that we have been observing ever since, especially post-2016 environment. So with the failed coup attempt, we have seen anti-Americanism rise. In the book, I make a reference to a public opinion poll that cite that Turkish citizens, about 83% of them, believe that CIA was behind the coup attempt, for instance. So very interesting figures there. Domestic factors, this coalition between Justice and Development Party and the nationalist parties in the Turkish context. So we are seeing all sorts of different domestic political as well as economic factors playing a role here. So, for instance, another domestic factor is the declining economic conditions in Turkey, that also caused a major strain on the relationship. But let me take you back. So in the book, I make the argument in the conclusion that there are three different scenarios that are possible scenarios, but only, unfortunately, one is the likely one, and that is the scenario number 3. So scenario number 1 is maintaining the status quo. Scenario number 2 is improving the status quo. And scenario number 3 is further decline in the relations between Turkey and the West. And I am normally a very optimistic person, just so we are clear. I like to think about things in a very optimistic way. However, my professional opinion is that at the time when I concluded the copy of my book and submitted to my publisher, which was the first half, at the end of the first half of 2019. So all the analysis is current up until the first half of the 2019. And all the indicators were pointing out that we have not yet seen the absolute bottom of this crisis in bilateral relations between Turkey and the West. So, and I am very happy professionally to recognize that my projections were correct. We have not at that time yet seen the absolute bottom of this relationship. And however, I have to also add that I am very sad personally to see it play out the way it did in the last 2 years or so. So I am a staunch transatlanticist. In my own academic work, I have always encouraged and analyzed ways of improving the relations between the United States and Europe, and Turkey and the United States and Europe. So seeing the current status quo really makes me incredibly disappointed and sad. So what are the post-2019 developments that we are seeing in the relations then? Since 2019, the prospects of Turkey entering the European Union further declined. So once again, there are some political reasons behind that, some technical reasons behind that as well. And we have seen, for instance, the relationship even between the United States and NATO allies have declined under the previous US administration's tenure. And so these really have left an important mark in the dynamic of the intra-alliance relations. And Turkey seems to have adopted an even more aggressive and confrontational foreign policy vis-à-vis the West, pursuing increasingly boundary-breaking relations, boundary-breaking type of intra-alliance opposition behavior vis-à-vis the West. And just so we are clear, boundary testing is when the allies engage in test the acceptable norms of behavior within the alliance. So what are the limits of the alliance? What are some of the acceptable things that we can all engage in? And what are some of the things that are absolute red lines not to be crossed? And boundary challenging is you still have an ally that wants to, that signals its willingness to be part of the alliance, yet is also interested in somewhat pursuing certain independent items on their agenda independently of the alliance, but they are very much willing to operate from within the alliance in boundary challenging behavior. And then finally, in boundary breaking behavior, we have an ally that is increasingly raising its voice against the other allies and increasingly dissatisfied with its status within the alliance and increasingly signaling its willingness to operate from outside of the alliance. So that is the theoretical framework of the book. And we have increasingly seen a Turkey that is willing to engage in boundary breaking type of behavior. To illustrate, ever since the book was published, last summer, we came very close to an exchange of a hot conflict, engagement in a hot conflict between Turkey and some of the European allies, mainly Greece, but to a certain extent France as well, as France sent some naval components to support Greece in its tensions, increased tensions with Turkey. So Turkey engages in, increasingly engages in hydrocarbon explorations in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we are seeing, for instance, at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, we have seen two different sets of agreements that Turkey has concluded with the government of National Accord of Libya, which basically not only meant closer defense and security support to the GNA in Libya from Turkey, but also it meant maritime delimitation agreement between Turkey and Libya at the expense of the territorial sovereignty of the Republic of Cyprus and Greece. So Greece has engaged in an agreement, similar agreement with Egypt, Turkey with Libya. So you see some conflicting areas there, which have caused major tensions in the relationship. And against that background, we have seen a United States that was also signaling its willingness to support Greece against Turkey. So there have been some symbolic military exercises between the United States and Greece, which Turkish Foreign Ministry actually criticized severely in their memorandums, in their memoranda about these developments in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Turkey also increasingly sees itself isolated in the Eastern Mediterranean. Here I have noted the East Med Gas Forum, which now is turned into an international institution based in Egypt. So Turkey sees itself being excluded from this particular institution, and feeling increasingly insecure in the region because of this emerging alliance that excludes Turkey. And at the same time, we already talked about the hot conflict. We have not yet talked about this very important topic in Turkey's relations with the West, S400 Crisis. There is a chapter, a significant portion of a chapter that is allocated to this particular issue in my book. And the agreement goes back to 2017. And Putin has been one of the first leaders to come to make a declaration about Russian support for the Turkish government at the time of the attempted coup. They really picked up the relationship quite intensely following the coup attempt. And we are seeing, however, Turkey has been warned by the NATO allies that Turkey should not actually purchase these two S400 missile defense systems, surface-to-air missile defense systems, from Russia, one of the main adversaries of the NATO alliance. And because of two reasons that were declared by the allies. One, interoperability principle. If Turkey were to integrate the system with the NATO frameworks, it would be interoperable. And secondly, because of the fears of intelligence infiltration by Russia into NATO's defense network systems. So we have seen these two reasons, creating this, backlash against the Turkish government's decision to purchase these S-400 missile defense systems from Russia. And Turkish authorities have repeatedly said that, we couldn't buy it from the European allies, we couldn't buy it from the United States. So this is our only option because we desperately need some system to protect the Turkish territories. And at the same time, there was this argument of a technology sharing of technology between Turkey and Russia with regards to the S-400s. So Turkish government has been very passionately advocating for the importing of technology from the European allies and the United States, which did not materialize. So there were the excuses used by the Turkish government, and the Western capitals were definitely watching these with alarm, with a great deal of alarm, these developments. And let me mention to you, in the book, I also talk about a previous episode on that front. By the way, Turkey was very close in 2013 to purchasing a Chinese technology, defense technology for the same purpose, but in the very last minute, Turkish authorities basically decided that it is not going to materialize. So in the book, I make the argument that the eventual operationalization of S-400 serve as a very important breaking point for the relationships, because every single activity that we engage in, every single foreign policy action that the governments engage in, it is not only true for the Turkish government, these are path dependent. It really creates path dependency, meaning that it is difficult to take a step back and engage in a mending of the relationship in a very easy way. So S400 is that breaking point, I make the point, because with every single further rapprochement between Turkey and Russia, we are going to see Turkey getting further distanced away from the European and the United States and the US allies. So why? Because as we have perfectly seen it be played in front of our own eyes recently, for instance, before President Trump left office, he implemented CAATSA sanctions, countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act. And these were relatively symbolic sanctions. It could have been worse. These are authorized by the US Congress. And, you know, just because Turkey engages in defense relations with the Russian defense industry, Turkey faces those sanctions. And with every further integration of Turkish and Russian defense cooperation, we are going to see relevant counter reactions from the NATO allies. And we have seen the Biden administration come to power. And I have a very funny situation that I would like to leave us all with. Before Blinken was appointed as the Secretary of State in the United States, he said in his testimony that Turkey is an ally that is increasingly acting as a non-ally. So I would like to say that Blinken really summarized the nature of the argument that was made in the book quite succinctly in this one sentence. So I would like to leave it there and I would like to move forward with the Q&A because our moderator warned me. Sorry, I just saw that. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Oya, for this kind of really nice presentation, really nicely summarizing the book. Also anticipating one of the main questions I had, which was about, you know, what about things that have happened since the book was written? So that was very good. Although I suspect there could be a lot more that we could even add, and that will maybe come up in the discussion. Before I leave the floor for the Q&A, I just wanted to kind of make one quick remark that a lot of things, a lot of ink have been, you know, spilled on talking about Turkish foreign policy and Turkey's role in the Western alliance and how things have. Sorry, I lose my. Yes, here you are. How things have evolved. Not necessarily in a very positive manner, etc. But we don't have that many kind of scholarly written books that really kind of approach that whole discussion in a very analytical manner, really kind of using a lot of insights from international relations theory, in particular, kind of realist and kind of neoclassical realism approaches on this kind of soft balancing kind of framework. And so really the beauty of this book is the conceptual clarity that it brings and kind of better highlights the different types of behavior that we have and kind of really evidence, kind of going beyond the headlines, evidence, the choice of case study, also very interesting, and go beyond what you typically hear in kind of more policy analysis type of publications. And also one of the beauties, I think, you know, people have used a lot the kind of, you know, from the West, Turkey drifting, and we kind of see Turkey kind of evolving individually with the West actors around. But what the book does really well is to kind of, in a sense, remind that we have an alliance, right? We have NATO, we have possibly, you know, Turkey, we have the bilateral US-Turkey relationship. And so it's more a discussion about what is happening, what are the politics of the interaction between the different alliance members, but from within the alliance. And indeed, as the analysis kind of go through, we realize that the alliance is becoming more complicated, and in particular, the role that Turkey plays in it is becoming more problematic. So there is maybe kind of a weaker actor, but most of the politics so far are happening kind of from within. And so understanding the interaction within this framework of the alliances, and not just as Turkey as an independent actor interacting with other independent actor, is one of what I thought was a great contribution to the book. So thank you, Oya, for all of this.
Thank you, Juliette.
So we still have a good amount of time for us to go through Q&A. There have been a few questions on the chat. I don't know if you have a chance to review them, Oya. Otherwise, I'm gonna leave the floor to anyone, so you can signal to me. You can raise your hand if you have a question, and I can kind of give you the floor. As you do so, please make sure that you keep your remarks relatively brief and kind of question oriented, so we can really have kind of a nice discussion. And if you can also kind of shortly introduce yourself, that would also be helpful for the discussion. So do we have any question at this point? Maybe I can start by reading the two that we had. So one from Odi Meyer, asking how much of the bitterness and agitation is Erdogan's rather than Turkey as a whole, which is indeed also kind of a question that I had regarding, you know, we tend to think of Turkey as this kind of single actor. A lot of it is because Erdogan is so central to the foreign policy expression or formulation in general. But especially when we talk about public opinion, we don't have a unified public opinion. So it would be interesting to see how your framework applies here. Mm-hmm. There is another, which I guess was more of a quick counterpoint from Vangelis Samis. Algeria, Israel, Spain, France, and Italy have also maritime borders with Turkey, no question mark. I'm also not too sure about this. Anyone else having a question at this point?
I may talk about the point about the grievances being Erdogan's rather than Turkey's. One can make an argument for both sides of that particular, for both sides, you know, one can make an argument for yes, it can be mainly based on President Erdogan's own aspirations about the future of the Turkish foreign policy, or perhaps others can say, yes, that's an issue, but at the same time, there is this overwhelming sentiment against the West within Turkey. Turks are feeling extremely, outcast. And at the same time, you know, really ostracized from the transatlantic family. And, enough is enough. We have to do something. Maybe someone can make an argument for that as well. So I can really see it, made credibly for both sides of that particular story, I think. But it is true that there have always been some tensions from the Turkish diplomacy when it comes to, for instance, the unresolved Cyprus issue. Vis-a-vis the West, that, Turkey did not really receive the support that it wants from the transatlantic allies. United States, for the most part, has stayed quite silent and not supported actively the, Cypriot side, Cypriot government. So interesting things, but the nature of the relationship is also changing here. So by acting in an increasingly boundary breaking behavior, I feel like it is going to act against the interests of Turkish foreign policy. Because ever since the 2018, moving onwards, the relationship between Turkey and Greece has really picked up. So it is something that is not going to serve the interests of Turkey per se, as Turkey seeks to navigate these really very volatile waters of Eastern Mediterranean. You definitely need to have the support of a superpower in the world. A declining one, but still one. I think these are very sensitive issues that need to be tackled very carefully. Thank you, Juliette.
And actually, kind of as a follow-up question, although the question is kind of reversed, because this time it's the emotional side is not so much within Turkey, but outside of Turkey, of people being irritated by Turkey or by Erdogan specifically. A question on the chat you can see from Richard Lewis. I too am interested regarding Erdogan being the irritant rather than Turkey as a whole. Or do you think this deterioration can be traced back to the Iraq War and the decision by Turkey to reject US forces using the country as doorway?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's really played a very important role. And one of my interviewees actually mentioned that, that's really caught the United States foreign policy making mechanism quite by surprise when the Turkish parliament rejected the resolution. So because by that point in time, all the preparations on the US side was based on the assumption that Turkey was going to open up its territory for the military intervention in Iraq. So that certainly marked a very important moment in the relationship, and some of the mistrust that I mentioned earlier in my talk really goes back to that particular episode in relations, which I also mentioned in the introductory chapter when I provide a historical overview of the relations. So very good point.
And if I may, sorry, push back a little bit more on the question. Going back to the first part of the question of Richard, to what extent, if we had another leader in place than Erdogan, even maybe from the same political party, do you think we would see the same kind of, playing around with testing, challenging, breaking, or we would see a different approach? Like, how much of it is him as an individual with his personality, or how much is it kind of more structural?
Mm-hmm. So the literature on soft balancing basically says that soft balancing can turn into hard balancing when the hegemon's behavior becomes too intolerable to the weaker powers. So they want to strike a balance using extreme measures, even though they are very well aware of the capabilities, intentions gap. Right? So Turkey is an emerging hard power state, but certainly not at the level that is comparable to the United States, for instance. But the final outcome, as I mentioned in the book, really depends on a variety of conditions, such as the issues at stake. What are the issues at stake? Do the transatlantic allies see eye to eye with each other, or does Turkey see eye to eye with some other third parties like Russia when it comes to these issues? And the answer to the latter answer is no to the second part of the rhetorical question that I have posed. Turkey certainly does not see eye to eye with Russia. So that is the very interesting point here, I think. So to me, everything has to be really observed from the lenses of the political motivations behind certain foreign policy actions. Because when you look at Nagorno-Karabakh, when you look at the Syrian quagmire, when you look at Libya, you do not see Turkey and Russia see eye to eye with each other, but you have the willingness on the part of the political leadership of these two countries to work collaboratively with each other, even though they have major disagreements, which really brought the relationship to a very tense point. If you recall, for instance, about a year ago, when we first entered the pandemic, we have seen the killing of over 30 Turkish soldiers by the Syrian military, supported by Russian air support. So that really put the government in a very difficult position to navigate this very uncertain situation, a very slippery situation. So you can see it from time to time, this aspect of Turkey and Russia not seeing eye to eye with each other, bringing up headaches for these two countries in maintaining their bilateral relations at the level they are right now. So, but irreconcilability of the positions of the parties, as well as the perceived value of the relationship between Turkey and the West, you know, how much are you willing to sacrifice to preserve this beautiful relationship, this mutually beneficial relationship? So these are the issues at stake, I think, when you are making any type of projections for the future. And one thing that is very important, as you mentioned, Juliette, Turkey's relations with the West is very well defined in an alliance framework. So you lack that type of a framework when you are talking about Turkey's relations with Russia. So, which really makes it quite unpredictable, right? Because you need certain well-defined institutions, rules, standards of behavior, norms that regulate your relationship with your allies, strategic partners. But you don't have that type of a dynamic between Turkey and Russia. So something important for us to consider as we make projections for the future.
We've had, I think, one observation and one question on the chat. Feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat, or if you just want to pose your question live, again, just raise your hand or make me a sign somehow, and I'll give you the floor. Odi Meyer, kind of adding to his previous question, makes the observation Turkey has far more support internationally than Erdogan has, and that is a big part of the problem. And then we have a question from Emre Isheri. Following Biden's remark on the 1915 events, do you expect Turkey to close its bases to American flight, just like the 1970s?
So wonderful points, actually. So it is definitely very important. This point that was made by Mayor is that I think it is a very important point, and especially the United States is quite, United States and the European Union are quite cognizant of that fact. So for instance, European Union always in the last couple of months have been saying, okay, let's initiate a positive agenda with Turkey, especially further bolstering the Turkish civil society so that we have firm allies there in terms of mending the relationship between Turkey and the European Union. And the same is true for NATO. NATO engaged in a tremendous amount of diplomatic activity just to make sure that Turkey and Greece would engage in de-escalation of tensions, for instance. So deconfliction mechanism, as they call it. And about Emre İşeri's point, it is a very good question. I really do not foresee that happen, because once again, I think that would be shooting ourselves in the foot type of a situation for Turkey. If they were to do that, it would mean further isolation of Turkey from the Western camp. And let's not forget, Turkey has so much to gain from its continued and strong presence within the NATO alliance. It, regardless of all the tensions that we have mentioned, it still gives all of these allies an equal veto power when it comes to deciding on certain issues vis-a-vis issues that the NATO alliance is going to deal with. So that is a very important point, I think. I sure hope not. So there may be other ways of dealing with that particular tension. It shouldn't come as a surprise to the Turkish government that this has happened, I think, because there were all sorts of warning signs coming to this particular point in time where the Biden administration made that declaration. If we were to recall last year, for instance, the Congress itself has, for the first time in a bipartisan partisan way passed that resolution to recognize it as genocide. So you are seeing all the warning signals come into play. And unfortunately, there is the fact that because of all these tense relations, Turkey has one by one lost most of the lobbying power of some pro-Turkish parts of the US government. So that is something that is very important to note, and that is quite an unfortunate, bringing us to quite an unfortunate status in the bilateral relations. But thank you very much. That was an excellent question.
Do we have any more questions? I sure do, but I want to make sure we have a chance for everyone to express whatever question I had. And we are kind of over time, but I got authorization ahead of time that we could go just a little bit over, just maybe a few minutes. Because see, we just have another question coming in, or a remark, I guess, from Chidambalem. In the past, Erdogan and his colleagues accepted the wrongs done to Armenians and Kurds. If you look at the past news from 2011, you will find those remarks. Yeah. I'm guessing this is referencing to kind of the openings we had towards toward the Armenian issue, the Kurdish issue, also the Alevi issue, kind of in the previous, toward the end of the previous decade. Mm-hmm. It's not really a question, so I don't know how much you want to address it.
No, thank you for that remark. I will definitely go back and take a look. I see. Once again, it is something that really reinforces the argument that is made in the book, I think, because our foreign policy, observation of foreign policy behaviors really depend on the domestic dynamics as much as international systemic dynamics and regional dynamics. So I tend to think along those lines as well. I think domestic circumstances may require certain different types of policies adopted at one point in time, and then the conjecture changes, and you adjust yourself as the government to these changing context, I think. But thank you very much. Very well taken. Comments very well taken.
Yeah, and Chidem added that looking for the I am looking for the records. I have them in my files, but Biden said nothing more than Erdogan already said earlier. I'm guessing. I mean, Biden. Well, no, sorry. Let's. Oh yeah, address the question. I just wanted to answer.
Feel free. Perhaps we can look at it like, I believe the number has been presented in a public way by Biden himself as 1.5 million, and that is the contested part, I believe. So, but yeah, we can definitely dig deeper into that.
Yeah, I see a lot of people are logging out, which is perfectly fine. Thank you all for attending. But I'll ask one last question, if you don't mind, because I think it's important also to think maybe more structurally regarding not just Turkish agency, but also the agency of the other actors in the alliance. And in particular, that came to mind when you mentioned the three types of factors that explain why we have kind of growing opposition within the alliance. So you had the international one, the domestic one, but then the second one was about the kind of irreconcilable interests, right, on Syria, on kind of other issues. And on those irreconcilable interests, I mean, isn't it the case that by definition an alliance should reconcile those interests or erase them one way or the other, right? So the alliance should not come in place in the first time if you have those irreconcilable interests, or if they come up later, there should be some kind of internal mechanism to prevent those irreconcilable interests to be kind of expressed out in the open. So what does it say about, I'd say, NATO in general? Is it outdated? Is it that something didn't function within the alliance that should have functioned? How do we explain that those irreconcilable differences explain alongside the alliance?
I think political context is really important here. So when Turkey has been admitted into the NATO alliance back in 1952, 3 years after the alliance itself has been formed, we have not had yet the Cyprus issue per se, right? So the Cyprus issue actually, you know, the interethnic, intercommunal violence has started later on, actually, before, right after Turkey and Greece have been admitted into the NATO alliance. So that is one. And another one is that normally these types of problems are dealt with without much of a public spotlight. So that is the thing that really makes it so unfortunate that we are seeing it played right in front of the public's eyes, because any type of public scene is going to create reputational issues for NATO that has to be dealt with directly, because here we see an immediate neighborhood of NATO that is increasingly under the pressure of rising Russian aspirations and you know, rising Chinese aspirations in the immediate neighborhood. So you have to make sure to contain these disagreements behind closed doors. Otherwise, the reputation of the alliance is going to be very much damaged. And this is something to be avoided at all costs, given the direness of the situation, international situation that NATO is dealing with. But I would say that the NATO alliance has done quite well in order to contain this crisis, for instance, that took place last summer. Countless hours have been put by NATO officials to bring the two sides together in the confliction mechanism. So even though not much progress has been made, it is also important to recognize that no hot conflict has occurred, and we have seen the recent meeting between the two foreign ministers of Turkey and Greece, even though they said that they didn't agree on anything. It was certainly a welcome development to avoid further escalation of conflict. And let's not forget, I mean, NATO has is the world's longest lasting military alliance. So it is important to acknowledge that it is constantly trying to revise itself and you know, make itself more relevant at today's issues and hot agenda items. So yeah. So-called Istanbul.
Right, I see a last question. This is really going to be the last for the talk today from Chidem Balim again. The construction of the so-called Istanbul was, do you think it will play a part in Turkish-US relation?
Well, I think it is very much in the rhetorical part of the reality right now. So it did not materialize, and I would be very surprised to see it materialize because of all the accounts that I have read about the Istanbul Canal and how economically not feasible it is. So but it is going to be an interesting issue if it materializes, as it certainly creates a different reality than the one that is captured by the Montreux Convention. So it has the potential of creating further strain on that front. But I believe it is certainly at the, as we stand, it is very much at the rhetorical level rather than something, a project that is ready to be executed, implemented in practice. But wonderful point. We should all closely observe.
All right, wonderful. I think that concludes. I don't want to go too much over time with the time that was allocated to us, but I really would like to thank everyone in the audience for being here and listening and participating with your questions. Of course, I'd like to thank CEFTUS for hosting us and allowing us to have the discussion. And Dr. Dursun-Özkanca, thank you so much for wonderful presentation and wonderful book. We wish everyone the best moving forward. Have a very good evening, everyone.
Thank you. And I would like to welcome your remarks as well. I'm always responsive to emails if you want to share with me your comments. I'm looking forward to receiving them as well. And thanks to Dr. Tolay and CEFTUS for hosting me and for moderating this discussion. Thank you, Dr. Tolay. It is such an honor to be in front of this distinguished audience. So thank you very much for these engaging questions. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening.